The life and death of Muhammad, the prophet of the Turks, and others, and who the Quran came through. And it wasn't like the Joseph Smith thing where he said, I'm the author first, and then he decided, oh, I shouldn't say that I'm the author in the book. Muhammad, the son of Abdullah, a various, I can't read that, indigenous religion person, I'm not going to say the hate speech term of the Christians here, at least I'm going to avoid saying it, was born posthumous at Jesrub, then a village of Arabia, Felix. His mother, a Jewess? No, it doesn't say that she was a Jew. But this person's claiming that Muhammad's mother was a Jew by birth and religion, dying when he was 2 years old. I don't think I've even heard this claim before. There's a bunch of accounts that say stuff that say otherwise, but dying when he was only 2 years old, left him to his uncle Abdul Muttalib, who, being of wise condition and unable to give him education above the common ignorance and irreligion of his century, at the age of 16 years, abandoned him to fortune, or, after the barbarous custom of the Arabs, and why was it barbarous? The Arabians sold him to the Ismailite merchants, who, exposing him to sale in the markets, he was purchased by Abdemonopole, a wealthy merchant. He, after some observation and experience of his wit and industry, withdrew him from the common drudgery of a slave to employ him with his other factors in commerce, and finding him apt for those affairs, gave him the conduct of his camels into Syria, Egypt, Persia, and elsewhere, by which in a short time he became so expert in his trade that he increased the wealth and profit of his master. So he gained his goodwill and affection. At that time, Heraclius being emperor of the East, and the seamless coat of the church, torn by variety of sects and heresies, the bishops and governors in Constantinople, justly fearing divine vengeance by reason of the Nestorian heresy. Now, sometimes stuff listed as heresy tends to be more correct, but with which that of the Monothelites began afresh to infect their clergy, deliberated on some ecclesiastical censure against them. And Sergius, a monk, and sectary of Nestorius, conscious of his error, and dreading the punishment, fled secretly into Arabia, and found retreat and entertainment with Abdemonopole, the master of Muhammad, where, finding slender hopes of propagating his outrageous heresy, the family, being people of indigenous religion, or ethnic religion, or what, and less of overthrowing his opponents in religions, he resolved to take revenge on Christianity itself, and to that effect began to practice on Mahomet, as his subject prepared to receive the impression of his design. In the meantime, Abd-Menapal died, his riches being augmented through the care and industries of Mahomet, who having before insinuated into the favor of his mistress Hsa by presents of rare toys. Khadija, I presume, and him being sold into slavery. No, it was the they would send them off to live in the desert to get trained in the rigors and skills of the out of the city life that they may have to encounter and live on later in life. Being thus grown opulent, he sometimes continued his trade, but then willing to take ease, as he had during his voyages through several countries, being a seeker and inquisitive concerning the diversity of religions professed through the universe. So now, through irresolute which to follow, he rejected all as vain and foolish except Judaism and Christianity, and approving the latter as the best, accordingly framed his life, assuming a specious form of sanctimony, which bred admiration in them that considered his former education and gave him a repute above his expectation. But this hasty fruit was soon corrupted, and with the touch of ambition, like the apples of Sodom, soon vanquished into a stink and filthiness. Well, okay, well, they're trying to reason. And in terms of belief, I don't know. I think Judaism is closer, but there's no evidence that he didn't think any of them are quite right, but he thought that it might be something each of them. For Sergius, as subtle, as malicious, observing his disposition, and withal, after some discourse concerning the two religions, of both which he found him excellently ignorant. Seeing it no difficulty to distill into him the poison of his heresy, easily persuaded him that Jesus Christ was but man simply, that for the merit of his virtues he was held as deified, that the sufferings of his death were but human inventions. Well, how many savior gods were said to have gone through the same thing? More or less, that he was transported from this life to an immortal and glorious by another way than that of death. That there is but one God in one person, so that the faith of the Christians is vain and invented, and that of the Jews too loose and lean through their own obstinacy. Now, it is clear that Muhammad never accepted Judaism or Christianity. And some of those reasons, like even before Muhammad had all the miracles that were done through him, according to the various narrations, which in a way that's more sound than anything you find in the Bible. As far as its transmission, the chains of narrators and that sort of thing, the disciplic succession, you could say, and the external people that weren't of the faith narrating things. That the Arabians being a dull and ignorant people, inclining neither to the one nor to the other, but all, as many had been touched by touch with the fame of his new sanctity, admiring his perfections, the Jews and Christians being likewise enemies to each other, and the Christians at variance among themselves, he might, in that juncture of affairs, assume the title of a prophet sent from God, to disabuse the one and the other, and save the world by another law. The council of Sergius took the desired effect, and Mahomet thought, before inflamed with his new-gotten wealth and fame, now entertained more ardent desires of being esteemed a prophet, looking upon all other attributes of religion and sanctity as vile and abject. Well, he didn't have the, he wasn't claiming to be a prophet or something. He just didn't seem that, something's not right about what's here. To this, the lettering and some of the spelling's different, and some of the texture is faded. And I'm reading off the screen, so that makes it a little bit harder here. To this effect, on a sudden, he retires to a solitary cave, not far distant from Mecca, while Sergius proclaimed the vain perfections of his life and filled the ears of the people with the noise of his deservings. The term of 2 years expired. Mahomet again appears to the world, and as if newly returned from the oracles of heaven, stilleth himself, a prophet sent from God, who, willing through his mercy to withdraw him from that precipice of his everlasting ruin, and admonisheth him of and yeah, I keep sneezing all over the place here. Admonishing him of his error. Well, yeah, supposed error, but Muhammad wasn't the one who really take a position one way or the other from what we see before his calling for a prophet. There were certain things he didn't take part in, but, afflicted his body with the falling sickness, which Muhammad, instead of repenting, made an advantage to promote his design. And well, apparently he didn't have a falling sickness, but people took little things of the sensual experience of his, of how he received the revelations, to make it sound like he was some epileptic person falling down and shaking and almost dying from choking his tongue and all that. But it's like there's not narrations that make it with those details. For his wife lamenting to see herself yoked to one so diseased and tormented with an hideous infirmity, which there's no narration to indicate that she had such feelings of aversion, or that Muhammad had, some infirmity. She excused it, and easily wrought in her a belief that being constrained frequently to converse with the angel Gabriel, his frail body, unable to abide the splendor of his heavenly presence, fell into that distemper, and at the departure of the divine ambassador recovered its former condition. His wife, being this, was not wanting to divulge the rare qualities of her husband, his admirable sanctity, and frequent converse with the angels, which gained him the esteem of a prophet in his own house and reverence among his neighbors, that this infant repute of his holiness might be the better strengthened. Muhammad thought it requisite to promulgate some chapters of Al-Quran. Well, as soon as he knew a portion, he went out and taught it. It wasn't, as a remonstrance of his commission. Getting rumbly the tumbly. I don't know if you can hear. Which, as he saw occasion, he shaped, though ill-favoredly to his designs, giving out that he received them from Angel Gabriel, as the counsel and precepts of God, who for that he had not saved men, either by the law of Moses, the Psalms of David, or the gospel of Jesus Christ, did now promise them infallible salvation by the means of Al-Quran, through which, rudely yet cunningly contrived, as complying with the loose humor of the Arabians. Well, people try to make jokes out of religion, whether it's right or wrong. People have always done that, haven't they? Enjoining nothing strict or burdensome, but leaving all to liberty. Now, if you look at the Quran itself, it kind of doesn't. You kind of see all evil kind of condemned therein. As the sole means to assure them to a belief of it. Induced first the parents and allies of his wife, the more ignorant and meaner to embrace it. Well, those who were oppressed and stuff like this. And to esteem Muhammad as the messenger of God sent to guide them into eternal felicity and the enjoyment of paradise, which the easier to ensnare them. He feigned to be full of such pleasures as fall under sense, and a plentiful fruition of those designs, that in those more barren and desert parts of Arabia they exceedingly wanted, having thus drawn to his devotion a numerous but vulgar part of the people, vulgars in common, who, in opinion of his prophetical function, or prompt to his obedience, he thought it altogether as easy to obtain a kingdom as he has found it not difficult to attain the title of a prophet. Well, we find that he wasn't avaricious of the unseen, and was wasn't jumping at, oh, I must be, whether Sunni or Shia, it's, he knew he was a prophet, whether it seemed like the easy thing or desirable thing or not. And to effect this, having before, under pretense of a reformation of religion, gained many followers, while more stood as onlookers on, not all regarding that decoy, he had resolved to yoke to it, that other concomitant in popular disturbances, liberty proclaiming it to be the will of God, that all men should enjoy it, and that the edict might be first obeyed in his own family, enfranchised his slaves, called Zaidi. This bait, as it enhanced his fame, so it added to his retinue, for as multitudes affecting nobility and mutation of condition daily added themselves to his party, so slaves from all parts of Arabia forsook their masters and fled to him as their redeemer. Well, not quite. What happened is that they forsook, per se, the religion of their slave masters. And it wasn't Muhammad that saved, it was doing and believing the right things, and not Muhammad did the hero deeds, and as long as we believe in them, so no, it wasn't the Christian sort of thing. And embraced his law as the means of their salvation. These, through a fond concert of his piety, ready to sacrifice their lives at his command, he divided into troops and sent to rob the caravans of the merchants that traveled through the farts, the Okay, the deserts. And by this means, having added to his treasure by spoil, and his retinue daily increasing by a multitude of fugitives and vagabonds, who, by reason of this liberty to act any villainy, resorted to him. Now, no, they knew it was stricter. The ethics to be employed were, going to hold them back from such things, if anything. He at length took up thoughts of employing them in the confirmation of his law, which he knew to be the ready way to his establishment in that power to which he aspired. To this purpose he marched with his troops towards Medina, the place of his birth and burial, to preach in a synagogue of Jews, there inhabiting. These, less stupid than the Arabians, could not endure his impostures. Well, but they couldn't prove any of them wrong. But when he made his way up there, he was accepted as the ruler of the community, whether, the Jews didn't accept him as prophet, and there were still people who didn't accept him as prophet that were Jews to the end. And instead of believing, did handsomely beat him. Yeah, no. Now was it Taif? Taif. He said the message and they didn't like it, and they sent even children to go beat him. So it wasn't even the men of the city so much as the youth. Well, maybe young men. I'm not sure the words used at the time. This repulse, rather irritating than terrifying him, he drew all his force into the field and assailed the Jews in two several conflicts, in one of which, by a wound on the face with a sword that broke out his front foreteeth, he signed the articles of his law with his blood and continued a long time as dead in a ditch. And so we see when it comes to the life of Muhammad, rather than him taking part in forcing people or punishing to accept his religion or hurting people when they don't, or even killing them, it was other people that were doing it to him in his community. So, but being rescued by his slaves and recovered his wound, he again fought and vanquished them and converted their synagogue into a temple for his own use. The same of his exploits increasing with the number of his secretaries, to whom some princes and eminent persons of the country began to incline, giving him their daughters in marriage, awakened the nobles of Mecca, particularly the family of Quraysh, who, wisely judging a new form of religion propagated by a new way, force of arms, which that doesn't make sense. You just heard that he's just preaching, and he doesn't fight a war until people are trying to kill him and his people. Must inevitably introduce a new government of which Muhammad, of base and obscure beginnings, would be chief, as the author opposed themselves to his designs, expelled all such as seemed to favor him out of the city, and several times gave him battle, in which he so valiantly deported himself, that though he was sometimes put to the worst, yet he more often prevailed, and giving freedom to such prisoners as would embrace his law, incorporated them into his army, strengthening himself and weakening his enemies, being in fine a complete conqueror in the field. He never lost as far as people obeyed him. The only lost battle was when there was issues, right? He assaulted the city of Mecca, took it, and after some slaughter of the nobility, his enemies proclaimed impunity to all that would acknowledge him a prophet of God, by whose favor as he affirmed and appointed. Not by his own valor, had attained to that honor. After the proclamation, well, he went out with the troops and fought. Obviously, if he's after this proclamation, many, for fear of present danger, well, I'm not sure that can be stated with any evidence being backed up, and apprehension of future bondage, more out of ignorance, embraced his belief, and he enjoyed the vain felicity to see himself general of an army, lord of a vast country, and to be esteemed and reverenced as a prophet. About that time, Heraclius, the emperor, disposing himself rather to improve the heresy of the Monothelites than to defend the confines of empire, not only permitted Mahomet to domineer in Arabia, but gave advantage to Khosroes, the Persian king, to invade his dominions, but at length awakened by the alarm of so puissant an enemy, levied a strong army and summoned the Saracens, a people so called from their inhabiting the desert, to his abastance. The Persian vanquished, and the Saracens expelling the salary of their labors, and with some importunity demanding it, were answered that the emperor had not sufficient treasure to pay the Christian troops, and therefore those that were considered to be heathen dogs must attend the conveniency of the prince. Incensed by this contempt, they retired and marched by the way of Africa. I presume they mean Africa, where finding Mahomet busy to enlarge his power, he aggravated their discontents, affirming it to be the will of God that all men should enjoy their liberty, that God was offended at their oppressions, and willed them to oppose the tyranny of the Christians. And anybody see Muhammad's fighting against tyranny, and that whoever died in that holy war, which is not a phrase that existed in Arabic, and it wasn't, there were no wars of conversion in the Islamic vision, his soul should be instantly transported to paradise. These motives raised them to a resolution of making deflection, so that they elected Muhammad their general. So when you completely mix up the, mix up the chronology, you can make different conclusions, I guess, but that would have been way back. Who incontently deprived the Emperor Heraclius of his tribute, and his officers, who were slain in demanding of their lives. After this act, the whole province, with that of Egypt, revolted, and the people generally esteeming the success of Muhammad's armies, which he was diligent to employ, as a sure testimony of the goodness of his cause, embraced his religion. Oh yeah, now he's working in later generations into this whole thing. Heraclius, having neglected to strangle this rebellion in its birth, endeavored to extinguish it, being now grown to considerable strength, and to that end sent an army under the conduct of Theodotus, his favorite. His army was twice overthrown, the general slain, and the Muslimin, pursuing their victories, took from the Greeks the countries of Egypt, Syria, and other provinces of Africa, where Muhammad increased his triumphs and erected his trophies. See, now some of these claims really, really make clear, what they're talking like, almost 1,000 years of stuff they're implying, and making conclusions. Yeah. Being now grown impotent. Rather through his inordinate life than burthened of years, he retired full of glory as a king and prophet to Mecca, where he resolved to end his days, having affirmed it in Al-Quran to be the most holy city of the world, as wherein stood the temple of Abraham, built miraculously by angels. Well, the Quran doesn't say that, but to be the sanctuary of all that repair thither in pilgrimage. And therefore it was that when he had by his armies taken the city of Antioch, he durst not enter into it in person, lest by the delightful and fertile situation of a situation of it. I can't quite read that. He should have been enticed to desert Mecca and contradict his own prophecy, his life now drawing to a period. A pleurisy surprised him. On the 7th day, for crisis of his disease, he became frantic. Hali, I presume he means Ali ibn Talib, one of his successors, astonished at his distemper and frenzy, not esteeming it one of the rare qualities of a prophet and a redeemer, as he stilled himself. Of so much people derided him, yet willing to continue his law, that he might inherit his power, carefully concealed it, and according to his commands, yet living, watched his body after his decease, for he told his followers that he should rise again the 3rd day and ascend to heaven. Well, Ali bin Talib never claimed that sort of stuff. They observed this, and guarding his corpse 4 days entire, with impatient expectation of his resurrection, were at length compelled, by reason of its putrefaction, to take him up and bury him at Medina, where his relics are annually visited by the superstitious pilgrims of his religion. Now, Islam does not allow pilgrimage to, you can visit graves, but it's not pilgrimage to the graves. And Islam doesn't allow the sort of building over the graves and that sort of thing. So it's not like people are actually visiting the relics. They're visiting the old houses of worship, which are largely torn down by the Saudis. But well, I mean, new places put in things, but the old walls and the old remnants removed. But thus Muhammad, prophet, well, international prophet, it says the church, author of Al-Quran, died on the 12th day of the month Rabi, well, in June, but the 12th day of Rabi al-Awwal, or Rabi al-Akhir, yeah, I think. So the 3rd month in the great climacterical year of his age, having directed people 23 full years with his message, dwelling in the esteem of a prophet 10 at Mecca, 13 at Medina. His coming was some years after the year 600. well, his coming with the message as a prophet was in the 600s. Heraclius, he died about 632, by the way. Heraclius, being an emperor at Constantinople, Cedenion, bishop of Rome, Clotaire, king of France, Viteri of Spain, and Edbald of England, he was of stature not tall, large sinews, brown color, and broad face, his head disproportioned to his body, yet may we well imagine the beauty of his body to surpass that of his mind, which is full of deceit, vicious, and cruel, never sparing anything to advance his lust, in which he equaled himself to 40 men, or to procure his revenge. He was, as himself confessed, altogether illiterate, and thought by nature subtle and quick-witted, yet often puzzled for the invention of delusive miracles. Now, well, bothered to, people wanted the religion to go their way. And didn't they all kind of show us this miracle, show us this, rather than waiting for whatever miracle was going to come? And there's a good 319 ones other than the Quran that are, brought up. To confirm the Arabians in their belief, for he continually preached to them that God had sent him to confirm his law. And it doesn't say by force of arms. It condemns those. The Islamic message is to condemn those who are forcing religion on people, and not by miracles. Yet the people, instantly demanding them as signs of his mission, he was constrained first to tell them of a certain voyage to heaven, which was briefly thus: the angel Gabriel, with 70 pair of wings, came to him by night, as he was in bed with his wife, Aisha, told him that God had sent for him. He, going down with his angel, found at his door an heterogeneous beast called Al-Barak, half donkey, half mule. So the breath, sort of like other things and other references of prophets being taken on mystical journeys, but it wasn't some flying donkey. It wasn't some flying mule, or it wasn't half donkey, half mule. It was of a similar size and sort of thing, but some of the details make quick, but much swifter than ether, for it would go as far at one step as the most quick-sighted could see. This beast, our believer of Al-Quran, would not let Muhammad mount him unless he would first promise to pray for him, which the charitable prophet did, and was, in the twinkling of an eye, brought by him to Jerusalem, where the angel Gabriel tied the beast with his girdle to a rock, and taking Muhammad on his shoulders, carrying him to heaven's gate, they knocked, and the porter, understanding Muhammad to be there, instantly opened and bade him welcome. In this first heaven, he saw angels of diverse and monstrous shapes, some composed of fire and snow, others of fire alone, every one of them verily shaped. While they were all light beings, that's the difference. So it's not. But I think they're maybe trying to describe some of the paintings that people made after or something. Among the rest, one with the head of a donkey. One with the head of a rooster, whose feet touched one heaven and head another, each heaven being distant from the other. A voyage of 500 years, when he crows, which, as his language, he moves the roosters of the earth to crow. This angel recommended him to another, he to a third, and so one to another, until he came to the heaven where God kept his residence. Islam, when we speak of the throne, greater than the footstool, greater than the seven heavens, and each heaven versus the other, like a ring in the desert, and those sorts of references. It's not that God is limited in being, God's closer than the jugular vein and most distant at the same time, but God's not this creation. So the biggest and smallest and everything in between, and around everything in between, but not, not the created. God courteously received him, asked him how his people did, how they entertained his law, and familiarly laid his hand upon his shoulder, which was so cold that it pierced to the marrow of his backbone. God had soon done with him, only telling him how often his people should make their prayers, which were so many, that as he was returning in the fourth heaven, Moses advised him to go back and entreat him that fewer prayers might serve his turn. For his people were not able to make so many, which he did, and after many returns, brought the number to 5. Well, a couple, it's said. But the whole thing was a teaching lesson to begin with. This done, he went back to his al-Barak, which, it's a different arranged word than what you see in the Bible that people say, oh, it's similar to this. Well, it's not that. That language has the same term and same etymology of both those terms, I think, which kind of proves the whole argument they're wrong, which in a moment brought him to his house in Mecca, where he went to bed again to his wife. She, not once, dreaming her husband would leave heaven for her company, or thinking he had been there. All this performed in the 10th part of a night. And it said that when he went, and then he went back, the door was still swinging. So one of those moments that time expands quite a bit, right? The Turks at this day fondly believe this is a truth, but the Arabians of his time, requiring him to do as much in their view, he unwilling to take again so long a journey, replied, Praise be God, I am a man and an apostle. He had other flights, which, in sight of the people, by art or sorcery he performed. Now, it's not Paul trying to convert Simon the magician, or, again, something else mixed in here. Or, but the journey is like from the 7th year of the Hijra. And they believed and entertained his miracles. Now, no, there's no reference to the disbelievers witnessing the spiritual things and therefore converting. Now, some people converted later, witnessed things and then converted later, but it wasn't like angels in the battlefield, that sort of thing. As a pigeon being by him taught to come and pick peas out of his ear, he told them it was the Holy Ghost that came to tell him what God would have him do. No, this is just something they're throwing into the story centuries later to make Muhammad look bad. So an ox brought him a chapter of Al-Quran upon his horns in full assembly. He likewise persuaded them that being at dinner at the house of one that pretended to be his friend, who had an intent to poison him, or at least was, so informed, a shoulder of mutton served into the table, forewarned him that he should not eat of it. And though many were present, none but he heard or understood the language of the mutton. So yet he permitted one of his dearest friends to eat of it and die poisoned. While people were eating, and he went for a bite, and the bite was in his mouth, and he spit it out because the mutton spoke to him. Such and many of like nature were his miracles, as the bowing of trees shaken by some sudden gust of wind, the howling of wolves, and braying of the donkeys, which is their language, desiring Mahomet to pray for them. And he, prophetically understanding, as religiously performed, his custom was often to inculcate into the ears of his auditors that God gave him commission to fulfill his own desires in all things, and to the purpose introduced God, speaking to him, "To thee, O prophet, it is permitted to lie with all women that are given thee. Or dost thou purchase thy aunts and kindred, and all good women that freely desire," see, Islam's very much about the consent of women, "thy company, and this is lawful for thee alone." His issue was only son, was one son called Qasim, who died before him, and many daughters. Well, not many, but multiple. Fatima, the eldest, in highest esteem at this day among the Arabians, and honored as the royal root of Aben al-Abbasi, was wife to Ali Zainab. The second was married to Uthman. Oh, Zainab was married to Uthman, so Ali. After son to Mahovius, and perhaps both successfully, for they both succeeded in the empire of Arabia. To her is attributed the original of the other family of Ibn Humayya. Emmi Altum and Nafisi are diversely mentioned by the most faithful historians, some delivering them as his daughters, others as his near kindred. On one seal which he used were engraven those words, "Muhammad, messenger of God. Heaven ordained him to be a scourge for the punishment of the Christians." Well, it wasn't about whether they were Christian or not. It's, going against the polytheism, and if there were behavior issues that had to be dealt with publicly, then, if someone was a Muslim and committing crimes, they weren't excused for that. Who in multitudes at that time had forsaken the truth to follow the sects and heresies of the Arians, Donatists, Nestorians, and others. The day of his death was no less prodigious than his life. A comet resembling a sword, appearing at high noon, pointing from south to north, when it was beheld the space of 30 days, which that age interpreted to portend the fatal rising and splendor of the Arabian Empire. And that's finished. And that's another thing I'm not familiar with. So that was a difficult read because I think that was read more than the Quran itself with M. So